we are aiming for 50,000 words for a
Right.
novel. But a lot of people are like, well, I'm writing fantasy. 50,000 seems really short. Or I'm writing anything, and
Yeah.
50,000 seems pretty short. And it's true. 50,000 words is a short novel.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are asking how long, or how do you know how long your novel should be? What are your thoughts on
So
that, sir?
I have a lot of data that I have a- acquired, accumulated, that may or may not be helpful. A simple Google search will answer this for you. Um, not not always in a succinct manner, but I think
Hmm.
there are some genre expectations, and I think you can, y- if you stay within the expectations, you're generally okay. But it's kind of that old adage of learning the rules so that you can then break them. Um, kind of just because there's an average expectation doesn't mean yours has to be that. But if
Hmm.
you're going to be an outlier in that, um, make it good, so that it supersedes the expectations, if that makes sense. But you can Google, and a typical middle grade book is 20,000 to 55,000, young adult 55 to 90, adult fiction 70 to 120. Well, there's uh, a lot of granularity within that adult fiction. Romance typically tends to be 50 to 100,000. It's still, I mean, that's a huge swath there from 50 to 100.
Yeah.
Mystery thrillers 70 to 90, fantasy sci-fi 90 to 120 plus. And I think
Hmm.
we know lots of them that are on the plus side
Hmm.
of that. Literary fiction 60 to 100. My point is kind of learn kind of what the average expectations are, try to get close to that, but if you're a little short of that, focus more on making what you have better as opposed to adding filler to hit an arbitrary number. If you take that extra time to make what you have the best it can be, people will kind of overlook the 5 to 10,000 word shortage or overage because the story is so good. Focus more on making the story better, and then the other will kind of wash out. But there are some genre expectations, and I think it's good to familiarize yourself with that so that you can get close. But don't do things to arbitrarily hit a number. Make the book you're writing better instead of just padding out to hit a number or trimming out every other sentence to make it shorter. That find a reason that this person wants to stick with your book if it's kind of overly long, or find a reason that they say this was the best dadgum 45,000 word novel I've
Hmm.
ever read, and honestly, it doesn't need another sentence.
Yeah.
Because there are situations where something comes in outside the expectations, but it's so perfect that nobody wants to change it. So shoot for that scenario. Um, but there are I pulled up a list of books that uh, with their typical word counts, and this may surprise a lot of people. The Great Gatsby, 47,000 words. So if we're talking about a 50,000 word novel for November,
Hmm.
yes, that's on the shorter side of a novel, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. Fahrenheit 451, 46,000 words. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, 50,000 words. The Giver by Lois Lowry, 43,000. Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk, I'm never sure how to pronounce his last name, 49,000 words. Catcher in the Rye, not one of my favorite books, as we talked before, but it's 73,000. You know, Slaughterhouse Five, one of my favorite books, 49,000. The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, 49,000. Animal Farm by George Orwell may surprise some folks, 30,000 words.
Hmm.
Of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck, 29,000 words. So that's a
So yeah.
perfect example of Mice and Men is such an emotionally hard-hitting book that you don't even think about the length of it,
Hmm.
and what are you going to add to Of Mice and Men to make it better?
Yeah.
Anyway, and then the list goes on and on and on. But that's I think
What's
I think my
interesting,
point's made.
What's interesting to me, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this, is like movies, for example. When I was, a teenager, early 20s, the average movie was 90 minutes long, right?
Right.
And if you were longer than that, you were a long movie. Now I want to say the average is like 2 hours, 2.5 hours in some cases.
Yeah.
So they're getting longer, right? Movies are just, on average, blockbuster movies are getting longer. Do you think the same thing's happening with books? Because most of the stuff that you mentioned there, they're more classics, right?
Yeah.
Which means they are just older books. Uh, Nowadays, when I go to Indigo, is our largest book retailer here in Canada, or if I
Mhm.
go to like a used bookstore or something, most of the books that I'm seeing that are popular, and I'm thinking like um, the Akatar series, the Court of Thorns and Roses.
Right.
It's like huge, and
Oh, yeah.
it's massive. Or you
Yeah.
look at, Wheel of Time, not really new, but they're still huge books and they're fantasy. Both of those are fantasy, so it's different. But I tend to see longer work these days than shorter work. Do you find that you read a lot
I
more than I
do.
do, because you get the
I
advanced reader copies? But
I do, see that happening a lot, and I don't really have a solid answer for that other than, I wonder if technology is kind of prodding that because
mhm,
when you had to type on a typewriter or write
mhm,
longhand,
mhm,
um, that doesn't really lend itself to 800-page
yeah,
fantasy epics, Um, I I've been reading, this is kind of a side, uh, conversation, but I've
it's
been
what we
reading
do.
this yeah, I've been reading this book, that I found on the Kindle store. It was The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, and he's having all these letters back and forth with his publisher, after he published The Hobbit and before he published the Lord of the Rings, and they were talking about he was talking about, doing another draft of the book and that he needed to get it typed, but he had to hire a typist to do that, and he was short of funds and just didn't have the money. This is right at the end of World War II,
Yeah,
and there's a
yeah.
paper shortage as well, and, he was like, "I just don't I'm gonna get it to you, but I just don't have the means right now to get it typed and corrected and all that." And I was just like, You're talking about the freaking Lord of the Rings. What you" and then I got to thinking, did Tolkien not own a typewriter? Like, what
Yeah.
did he wrote this all in fountain pen? What in the world? So I think the medium, uh, definitely has dictated publishing. It has
Mhm,
to have. If you're writing longhand, typing, then when the word processor comes about, we used to have dedicated word processor machines, which is kind of an automated typewriter. And then you go from that to the computer where you can change and delete whole paragraphs or, add 7 paragraphs where there used to not be any. And then all of a sudden, this really poignant 100-page thing, you have the room for it to swell to 300, 400,
mhm,
500, 600 pages. I just wonder if that's all there is to it, or, I don't know if there's that, and then there's maybe the idea that we're inundated with so much entertainment now that we just have the freedom
mhm.
to explore worlds more deeply, characters more deeply. I don't know
Like,
I
we're a
don't know
little more
what to
tolerant
attribute.
of all that kinda stuff.
Yeah, I don't know, society has changed a lot since the 1940s.
Mhm,
Um, we could argue that we have more free time on our hands. Maybe that plays into it. I don't know,
mhm.
but
It's
they most definitely have gotten longer.
Yeah, and it's interesting because from an editor's perspective, not that I edited books from the 1940s, but language has become a lot more succinct
Right,
these days. Writing is less flowery, and we encourage it to be less flowery,
right.
and more showing, less telling. Whereas it used to be a heck of a lot more telling than showing.
Yeah,
Um, and still, the
true.
books are very short. The Hobbit is a very short book, right?
Yeah, which
So.
just proves that there's no way it should have been 3 movies. That that's a hill I'll die on, and I'm sorry.
For this question specifically, I wanted to add a little bit more because I agree
Yeah,
wholeheartedly with what you say, right? Write the story that is worth telling in however many words it takes to
yeah,
make it worth telling. I think that self-publishing or indie publishing has played a big role in this, because especially for new authors, traditional publishers will cut you off at a certain point, right? There's
Yes.
a return on investment calculation there. How much is it going to cost to print this versus how much do we think we're going to make? When
Right.
you're self-publishing, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's why my first book was 111,000 words. And now the third book in that same series, I was aiming for 140. It's looking more like 180 at this point. I just shrug. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
it is what it is. I'd
Right.
also be curious to know if there's any numbers behind Kindle Unlimited that coincide with the lengthening of books. Because the longer your book, the more Kindle Unlimited money you get for a full read,
Right.
right? So I'd be intrigued to see that. But as far as how do you know how long your novel should be, look at those kind of expectations. If you're going traditionally published, then or that if that's what you want to do, look at publisher expectations, but tell your story. Tell
Yeah.
it in however many words it takes. When you go to edit, I had a writer much wiser than I once tell me that he always cuts at least 10% of his word count when he does his edits. And I think that's a fairly good rule. Like, it's not a hard and fast rule, but that's generally what you're looking to cut afterwards,
Mhm.
because you're going to have a lot of fluff in there.
Right.
So that's usually the yardstick I use to measure my word counts by, if I care about them at all. So,
Yeah.
so yeah. So it's a deceptively interesting question, this
It
one,
is.
which is why
And
I like
you
to
brought up
include
a
it.
good point with Kindle Unlimited and indie publishing. Uh, uh, some of these genre expectations have shifted a little bit. Like for instance, romance. There are some indie published romances that are doing very well in Kindle Unlimited. They're on the shorter side. They're about
Mhm.
50,000 words. Some of them get down to 40 to 45,000 words, and their authors are doing very well with those books. So, in addition to kind of looking at what the publishing expectation is, also do a Google search for um, what uh, what Kindle published or indie published books are doing also. And there's Klytics is a great service to look at. It's a paid service, but if you're researching your genre and really want to go deep, it would benefit you to look at, because they do research on individual genres of indie published books, things that are selling on on KDP or on the Amazon store, and they go really deep on exact word counts and what keywords are working, what cover art is working, and all of that. And that would, if you're looking to indie publish and you're looking to find out exactly where you need to be, that would be a worthwhile $30 to spend to just buy one of their reports and look at
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Not a
I
have
will
to,
say too,
but it is helpful.
my best-selling books, the ones that I co-authored, are all under 60,000 words, and they're urban fantasy. And urban fantasy is a punchier genre. It is
Right.
faster paced. It is not usually that short, but we intentionally wrote them that short because they're supposed to be digestible, like almost monster of the week style episodic books. And so
Right.
we wanted people to just consume them and then move on to the next, consume it, move on to the next. And they've done extraordinarily well, right? Like better
Nice.
than I could have hoped. And they are, one is 33,000 words. That one's technically a novella. 47,500 words and 56,000 words.
Nice.
So like there's no, as long as you know, as long as you're intentional about it and tell the story you want to tell,
Yeah.
this number can be whatever.
Right. And if you're publishing in a series, especially a long running series like some cozy mysteries do or some romance do, I think it's okay to have shorter books if you're
Mhm.
publishing a long series and more often, because then you kind of get the read through. I
Mhm.
think readers are very accepting of that. If you have standalones and you're a year between books, pretty sure readers would appreciate a longer
A
book.
longer book.
So just take those things into account as well.
Now, this is more a personal question, but since we can ramble as much as we want, and it's
Right.
kind of related, in my head, especially for fantasy books, because that's
Mhm.
primarily what I read, as a series goes on, the books get longer, or they
Right.
tend to. Um, and I was thinking in my next book after this, 180,000 words is a lot. right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm gonna make that or not. Do you think it looks strange in something like a fantasy series when a sequel is shorter than the book or two before it?
Hmm. Um, I'm trying to think of I are we talking about a trilogy?
Oh, 6 books.
6 books, okay, because I'm thinking of trilogies where the 2nd book in the series is technically a little shorter.
Mhm.
Um, I kinda think Lord of the Rings is I kinda think The Two Towers is the shorter of the 3 books. I'm not sure about that, don't quote me on that.
I'm gonna
But
quote you on it.
I know, I know. Um, no, I don't think if it's drastically different,
So I
um
have numbers here.
okay, lay
The
'em out.
Fellowship of the Ring was 187,000 words. Two
Longer
Towers
than I
was
thought.
156,
Okay.
and Return of the King was 137.
Really?
The shortest. Okay, so that answers that for me. If Tolkien
Okay.
did it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.